Hi there. And yeah, it's been a minute. And the reason for that is because there are some excellent new INFP content creators. And as they have stepped up their content, I have felt like I've had a bit of a vacation. I could sit back and enjoy their content. They're fantastic creators, in my opinion. So I would like to recommend both Radish Raven. She is a doctor in Sweden. And also Bufo Periglenis. It's the Latin name for the golden toad. And her content, I would say it's heavy, it's serious, viewer discretion advised, but they are both fantastic INFP content creators, in my opinion, insofar as I may or may not be an INFP, and they may or may not be INFPs, but if one were to put us into the same room, along with other people of similar temperament, it seems to me like they sort out and say, yep, the content they talk about is different, the applications, the opinions are different, but the operating system looks fairly similar. So I'm just deeply appreciative that they are out there doing their own thing, posting content, putting some deep thoughts out there, and hopefully you'll check them out as well. And I think that you may find it worth your while. So anyway, today I'm going to talk about how I came to the belief that I'm an INFP. I've stayed away from this for quite a while. The reason being that if I describe how I came to it, I'm afraid that people who are bushwhacking their own path may have this taken away from them, the opportunity to determine type on their own using their own discoveries or their own realizations. Be that as it may, it seems worth it to bring it up because there are many paths to take to figure out type, and this may or may not be helpful as a reference. So, and I'll also try and keep it short because every time I've started this, it's always ended up being way too long. So I'll really cut it down, condense it. The way I came to type. Well, first, I took the MBTI assessment 30 years ago. I thought I was an ENFP. It was pre-internet. The descriptions weren't good. I came back to it, 10 years ago or something, and got INFP for an assessment, and then just dropped it again. Came back to it 4 or 5 years ago, and then started stepping into it a little bit more, and then maybe 2-3 years ago, really started checking to see whether or not my basic assessment was correct. And the way I went about this is, first you start off thinking about how do I determine my type, knowing that I don't know what functions I'm using. My functions may be imperfect in the way that they would determine type, so I can be fooled by my own functions. Where do I start? And where I started was first, SE and NE weren't going to be helpful for figuring out type. SI, experiential reference, and NI, knowing, were also going to be unhelpful. SI because it sticks you within your own experiential frame of reference, and that's just going to tell you what you already know. It's not going to give you information outside of your own frame. And then NI, because that knowledge is not going to be, you can't tell necessarily if you have excellent NI or poor NI, and the evidence of that is all over the internet, people who believe they have excellent NI who don't necessarily. So that was the first step. Get rid of all the perceiving functions. You're going to have to do this purely through deduction. So that leaves, FE and TE are not going to be so helpful in that. It'll help you gather reference material. You could ask other people and do social stuff. But really it comes down to FI and TI. You've got one of those two in your stack, and you're going to have to use that to sort out your type. I went with the assumption that I had FI because TI would be logic and logically objective, and that would be the easier route to go. FI, you are based on your own subjective ideas of what your type is. So that's going to be the tougher road to get towards. So anyway, I started with saying, all right, first thing, I have to remove all bias from the system. And the way to do that is to sit with each of the possible personality types I might be and try it on and get comfortable with it and feel like I really could be that type and it would be okay. So that's what I did. I sat with ISFP, ISTJ. This process took weeks and weeks that I just go back and forth and try them all out until I got to a point where it really didn't matter what type I was or what type I would be. And then at that point, I could start looking around for ways to assess how I fare compared to other people in different tools. And that's where I ended up doing a lot of this storytelling, because it seemed to me that NE is the one that people tend to get wrong, NI or NE. I believed I was NE from past reference, so it's like, let's put this to the test. And I did so through a lot of the early videos here and a bunch of other fun exercises and stuff, just to say, am I good at this? Is it comfortable? Is it natural to me? And the answer is yes, of course. It's something that I've been doing all along. And just, if you look at that's why I've got the bookshelf behind me. As a kid, I got into tabletop role-playing games because it was a way of taking the self and telling a story about things that are important. Doing a meditation on the nature of good and evil, talking about or thinking about motivations and flaws and how those flaws can come to our undoing or are overcome to success. So anyway, that's a segue to tabletop role-playing games, but the end result was that, yes, it seemed that I am NE, that NE seemed to be reasonably high. Then looking back and saying, you're probably the sort of person who would say the first thing we need to do by determining type is to remove bias from the system or understand and embrace the bias that's there to be able to counteract it or compensate for it. That would probably only be someone who's FI Dom. So looking at the preponderance of the evidence, stripping away all the other stuff about type, what it boils down to when you look at the first two functions is that an INFP is a deliberator on a subjective field who works in the sphere of abstractions. And so it seemed to me kind of obvious, like, well, that's kind of like everything you do. And you just went through a completely pointless exercise that took you a couple of months just for the sake of proving to yourself that this stuff, in kind of forgetting everything else in the background, that this stuff actually going forward looks the way that you think it does, so that you can make sure that it's properly and appropriately tested, and then go back and say, okay, well, I guess all the history stuff that you dismissed is probably applicable to this after all. So that's how I got there. Then I still didn't trust it, so I got typed. And then I still didn't fully trust it because, like I said, I believe I'm an INFP. I've been open to other possibilities. I've been called all sorts of other things, some of them nicer than others, some of them four-letter words, four-letter terms like MBTI. But that's how I got to sort out to that point. And yes, this process itself may be flawed, but the evidence that somebody would take months of reflection to question and sort out and then leave it all kind of open to question and interpretation, even though it seems to be a fairly reliable answer when the answer was already staring you at the face the entire time because of a lifetime of having to deal with the head stuffed with straw. It seems like there would need to be a fairly strong body of evidence to determine that I'm actually another type. And if there is, then I'm open to being that other type. Anyway, that is the shortest ramble that I've managed to make of this. I hope you have some takeaway as to whether or not this is helpful for you to determine your own type. You may use the same template in an entirely different way to say, where do I start? What can I depend on with my cognitive functions? What do I need to dismiss? And how do I build up from scratch a determination of my type without using the tools that will lead me astray? Again, it's a weird self-referential loop that I ended up in. It seems to have worked for me. I hope that you find something that seems to work for you to help verify your type. And with that, I will bid you a good day for now.